it's a scary time because we are becoming rapidly obsolete, and you know that. However, I also believe what we humans can do has never been really seen for a long time. I like that old song, "You Ain't Seen Nothing Yet." Right? I really do think the wizards, the magicians, the prophets, the powerful ones of the past were human, and they had abilities that they were able to access that we also can access. We just need to find out how to do that. Gautam Dayan, welcome to Viking Superpowers. So, my first episode will be about a man, a very special man who's become quite a good friend. We haven't met face to face, but we'll be meeting in a couple of months when I go to Iceland. His name's Ármann Jakobsson. He's the professor of Old Icelandic literature at the Háskóli Íslands, which means the University of Iceland. And Professor Jacobson and I started writing quite a while ago. I'm not sure exactly how long, maybe over a year. And we talked back and forth about the Viking sagas, the Icelandic sagas, and I was able to talk to him about all the sort of little intricacies that I couldn't talk to anybody else about, he being one of the great world authorities on the subject. Early on I read his wonderful book called The Troll Inside You, Paranormal Activity in the Medieval North. We tend to think of the academic world as being quite a staid, conservative, even super conservative world where outlandish ideas, like the sort of ideas I present here, are considered well beyond the pale. But here's a full professor, a world-renowned expert, known and beloved actually by the top people in the field of Viking studies and Old Norse literature. And yet he's very open to talk to an ordinary guy like me, albeit somebody who's got a bit of interest and has things worth saying, but still it was quite touching that a man of his eminence should write to me back and forth, and we've had some really good exchanges and quite funny exchanges. I just wanted to read you a letter that we wrote to each other in July of 2023, and I've been asking him different things back and forth. And in full disclosure, I'm not saying that Professor Jacobson believes that there was ancient aliens or ancient high-tech in the sagas. I'm not saying even that he absolutely believes in the reality of the paranormal and superpowers. His interest is very academic, but I also believe that if somebody has an open mind, he's not a closed-minded person. So what I wrote to him was, I just read your Beware of the Elf essay. As always, great food for thought and very enlightening. I love your concluding sentence. Those who made offerings to elves, seeking their assistance or appeasing them, did thus not necessarily believe in a superior race, but they did believe in paranormal powers superior to themselves, something that modern people find it much harder to do. And I've written on the top of this printout, and the Aesir were elves. This is one of the fascinating things in his book. He reveals that these words, which we taxonomically arrange like gods, Aesir, trolls, elves, dwarves, Thursa, Jotnar, the names that get translated as giants. When you really know the sagas back to front as he does, and being a native Icelander, he understands Old Norse perfectly, and on a profound level, And he basically says that the old people who wrote these stories didn't make such fine differentiations between groups as if they were species. So one of the really interesting things is essentially the Aesir, Thor, Odin, Loki, Freya, Balder, Gefjon, Skagi, all the famous gods of the Vikings were also in their own ways categorizable as elves. That's not what I want to talk about today, but I will be getting to that eventually. But the thing is, what he says here is so right, that the people in the past made offerings to elves not because they believed that they were a superior species to them, as in a god, but because these beings, they believed these beings had paranormal powers, the ability of far sight, the ability to maybe change shape, to do all sorts of magic. And the thing is, the high tech that I talk about, the ancient alien idea that these beings in the past had super high tech, the sort of things we have but on an even higher level, these things would appear to be paranormal powers. These things would appear to be magic to anybody, even now probably, but 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 200 definitely. Way back to the Viking Age, people would have just gone, that's just magic. But it's interesting, as he says, that they didn't consider them to be a superior race, just people with superior abilities. And that's really what I'm on about in Viking Superpowers, that these ancestral beings and people who we seem to be descended from, and who most probably, I believe, and many others believe, genetically tweaked us, mixed with us. They were humanoid, they were able to mate with humans, so therefore they can't have been all that different genetically, but they had things that were different, that they were sort of unattenuated. These powers were full on. And it's my opinion that for us moderns, coming into this age of AI, of intelligent machines, of robotics, it's a scary time because we are becoming rapidly obsolete, and you know that. However, I also believe what we humans can do has never been really seen for a long time. I like that old song, "You ain't seen nothing yet." Right? I really do think the wizards, the magicians, the prophets, the powerful ones of the past were human, and they had abilities that they were able to access that we also can access. We just need to find out how to do that. So I go on in the letter. I don't think I have told you this previously, but I'm working on a book in which I will write about the paranormal stories and beliefs in the sagas and Eddas, begun before I discovered you, but greatly inspired by your writing, and giving my own interpretation of them and belief that they could be real, based on a lifetime of unusual experiences and the experiences of others. I also venture into the controversial idea that Snorri's so-called euhemeristic explanation of the Aesir being super powerful humanoids could be true, and not just a deflectionary tactic to avoid the censure of the clerical powers. And what I'm saying there is, and I'll be explaining this more in videos about Snorri Sturluson, who wrote the sagas and the Eddas, the ones we're really looking at, the ones that are about the Viking, in brackets, gods. People often say that he takes a euhemeristic approach, which is a fancy word meaning he doesn't believe in the gods, so he puts humans and human kings and human people into these stories and tries to find more mundane reasons for how these things happen. And supposedly this is because he's this fanatical rabid Christian who's doing this, to try and put down the Norse gods, whereas that just doesn't make any sense to me, because he wasn't a rabid Christian. I personally think he wasn't a Christian at all. I think he was the last of the great pagan skulls, the poets of these great stories. But even if he was a rabid Christian, why would he bother writing this great work, which is not going to be read by the average person? It'd be better to just let the thing die, wouldn't it? If you wanted people to forget, but that's the last thing he wants, is for people to forget. And I believe he's a great hero of the North. And the little tiny bits that they can pick out to say that he was doing it for the sake of the church. And I'm not picking on Christianity here, because I really do believe that Jesus was a very holy person and that there is a God. But I'm not a Christian in that, fundamentalist sense. But I think it's the church, the authoritarian church, who was the problem. The Roman church, essentially the Roman Empire as a spiritual empire, and a very vicious one. I'll talk more about that too. The thing is, Snorri's explanations were not euhemeristic. This is an ancient Greek word. I think he was telling what he received from the ancient ones in absolute truth, with all honour. And people dishonour Snorri greatly by indicating that he was lying. He says straight out, I'm not lying. I'm telling you exactly what I got from old people of great repute. This is what all these ancient skulls wrote. This is what we remember. I'm a historian. I'm telling you what's been passed down. I'm not making this up. So he wasn't making it up. Anyway, I go on, which is why I'm fascinated by that word himin, H-I-M-I-N-N, and related words, because wherever it is translated as heaven, which is what people do in English, they translate the word in the saga as himin, which means the sky, and it actually means whatever's up there where the stars are. It basically means outer space. Whenever it's translated as heaven, it seems to me that the translator, consciously or unconsciously, wants it to mean another dimension, a separate spiritual reality, in line with the theological or standard mythological view that the gods or God couldn't actually have lived here. They couldn't have worked or have had their halls, ships, power fields, their great city of Asgard in the sky or in space. And people still think like that, but this word heaven really gets up my nose, and that is another video. But heaven is an archaic English word, and no one uses that word. It's only ever used to say, oh, hark, the heavens are beauteous tonight, sort of a mocking Shakespearean way, or as a purely religious word, implying this, that heaven, what the Vikings are talking about, what Snorri is talking about when he uses the word himin, is sort of implying that they're talking about a different realm. It couldn't be what it seems to be saying, as it is in modern Icelandic, and as it often is in the sagas. It just straight out says the sky, straight out says where the moon is, where the stars are. It's not talking about another realm. It's saying up there, where we can't go, but we believe they went up there and they came down from there. They did things up there. They had massive fortresses up there. Very interesting stuff. So people pre the age of flight, and particularly pre the space age, couldn't envisage any possibility of real beings operating or coming from space. And moderns probably don't want to think about the possibility of an ancient high-tech explanation for who the gods actually were, which is it's very much what the battle is for people like me, for people like you watching this. We're really up against it because there's a mainstream, it's very strong, of atheist, materialist, skeptics, debunkers, who call all this pseudoscience. They'd call me a pseudo-historian, a pseudo-philosopher, a pseudo-scientist, a pseudo-thinker, a pseudo-person. Yes, and that's their opinion. It's not based on any kind of real facts. They don't know that's the truth. So I went on, I'm not convinced that these ancient stories, including the Bible, Greek pantheon, Sumerians, etc., refer necessarily to ET races. Okay, so I'm saying I'm not really necessarily saying that these Aesir, these gods of the Viking Age who flew around in different craft and did amazing things, that they were aliens, as in they're green and scaly, or they got tentacles, or they're super different from us. As I mentioned before, they could mate with us, so they can't be that different. I don't discount that possibility, but the breeding with humans that they do extensively, and which goes on in all those other, ancient stories, so-called myths, indicate that these powerful ones, these Aesir, these Rayin, that's another word for them, which literally means the powerful ones who go to the council, which is like, as Paul Anthony Wallace writes about the Sky Council, as Mauro Biglino talks about the Elohim, the powerful ones in ancient Hebrew, who belong to this Sky Council. They get together with other Elohim and they work out their differences and they make their plans. So our Aesir, our Viking gods, our powerful ones, seem to have been part of that crew, and it's getting more and more likely. So thus the question, where did the very advanced culture come from? Strange person that I am, I've been thinking about this since I was a young teenager in the early 70s, when I first read Erich von Daniken's Chariots of the Gods. I think it's quite possible that the human race developed to a very high level hundreds of thousands of years ago and went off-world, perhaps in response to a catastrophic asteroid strike and the resulting floods, then sent teams back to oversee any survivors. A story echoed in many ancient stories, and that's true. There's flood stories from all over the world, including in China. I think the word for flood looks like a big ark, like a boat. But be that as it may, I've thought this for a long time. I do believe there is extraterrestrials. I do believe that the light speed barrier is not really a barrier. That's a populated universe, but I do think what we're reading about in the Viking Eddas and the sagas relating to the mythology are humanoid, but my theory has always been that they were humans who advanced to a very high level, went off-world, maybe because the big asteroid was coming, or they saw something happening, they escaped, and then they came back and collected all the survivors and restarted things. There's other possibilities. People like Erich von Daniken, Paul Anthony Wallace, Mauro Biglino, Matt Lacroix, Billy C. Carson, Graham Hancock, are all looking into this subject, are all prepared to be disparaged as pseudo-historians, pseudo-scientists. Like me, they just don't care, because when you discover things are real that others say are impossible, at first it's quite confusing and confronting, but eventually you realise that who cares what they say, they're wrong, and you know you're right. So you just stick to your truth, as they say. You just stick to what you know to be true. So I finish off my letter saying, if nothing else, I think it's a bloody good story. Kindest regards, Dave. And this is what the professor wrote to me. He said, I do remember, indeed, von Daniken. Did you know that he's still alive? The project sounds most interesting. Talking about my project, which gave me a big thrill. Because, as I said, he's a very open-minded man. He's not saying, oh yeah, your project's absolutely true and spot on. But he finds an interesting idea, which is encouraging. And then he goes on to say, do you know the work of Benjamin Olshin? He has studied extensively narratives about flying before the modern technology existed. Unlike so many others, He has a strong philological background and examines the sources extra carefully. Regards, Adaman. So he put me on to somebody that I've been studying quite extensively, and this gentleman, Benjamin Olshin, is like Ármann Jakobsson, a very highly regarded, highly credentialed academic, yet he's prepared to stick his neck out and go out on a limb, as they say, and look into ancient narratives and basically say, look, why do we say this person, basically in my surfy, old-time surfy parlance, why would we say, oh, this guy's just tripping writing this story? Why don't we give them the benefit of being just as intelligent as us? Sure, they don't have the same scientific background as we do as far as we know, but they're telling us about things that they believed absolutely to be true, as Snorri Sturluson's doing, not just a mouthpiece of the church, or not just some dishonourable character who was disparaging the beliefs of his ancestors, but he's saying, I've been told this. And in Snorri's case, what a lot of people never speak about is the fact that he spent 2 years in the royal court of Norway and then basically the royal court of Sweden, talking to the royal families, and in the sagas and the Eddas, he states that these families all believe they descended from these Aesir who came up from Anatolia, Turkey, and moved up there and took over the north with their amazing powers, with their beauty, but essentially they just invaded and took over, but the local people really couldn't stand against them. They intermarried with the local ladies and some of the gentry, and they formed these royal dynasties, which I believe kept records of much more than just this was the father, this is the grandfather, back and back and back until you get back to Odin or Thor or Freya or, Frigg. I believe that there was a lot that is now lost, and our old friends, the Holy Roman Empire, is to blame for a heck of a lot of what's lost, because they just destroyed it, and they destroyed the people who knew it. And we have trouble now understanding just what it would be like to go through that sort of persecution, but that's what was going on. They weren't about free speech, they weren't about debating, they were about agree or fuss or die. It wasn't just getting cancelled that was the issue, it was actually getting cancelled. Not good. Alright, so that's it for today. This is the first in the series, as I said. Look forward to the next ones. In the blurb below, I'll put where you can buy Professor Jacobson's fantastic book, and where you can find out a bit more about him. And I'll also see if I can dig up. I actually haven't got that book by Benjamin Olshin, but I'll see if I can find the link to it. I had to find it on some obscure scholastic website, but it's one of those really interesting books that's out of print for some reason. Anyway, please subscribe and please like if you like this video, and please comment. I'm always really keen to hear from you, what you think, ask any questions you want. I'm in the exciting lead up to my Viking Superpowers tour of Scandinavia and Iceland. Lots of great things are coming. I'm actually that guy, the old saying, he's forgotten more than you'll ever know. Well, that's pretty much me when it comes to the Viking Age. I have spent 50 years reading so much and thinking so much, watching so much, meeting people, that a lot of things that I know are sort of buried and they're starting to pop out, and I'm going, oh yeah, that place. Starting to remember the places and the things I want to see. That's going to be a good trip. Anyway, see you next time.